Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we are doing another single brewer review. So two different beers, two different styles from the same brewer. And this one is going to be a real treat. In fact, I'm really shocked that I haven't done this brewery yet, as this is one of the most hands down revered craft breweries in the world. It is known globally by craft beer fanatics. We are reviewing Mikkeller out of Copenhagen, Denmark. Today we are doing an IPA and a blonde ale. So we're going to be starting with the IPA. This is Better Half. It's 6.8% ABV. And then we'll move on to their blonde ale, which is called Shapes, and parentheses Former. So interesting title. Not really sure if they call it Shapes Former, Former Shapes, or Shapes, with the idea that they're former shapes. I have no idea. And we'll get to the can and label art when we get to the beers individually. But the blonde ale is 5.6% ABV, so only 1.2% ABV apart. Really sitting right in the Goldilocks zone for the IPA. Blonde ale's got a little higher ABV than average, so I'm really excited about both of these. I have never had a less than stellar beer by Mikkeller, so I really can't wait to jump in these. These are both brand new beers to me. I have never had them, and I did get them at my local Total Wine here in Tampa. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in, starting with Better Half, the IPA at 6.8% ABV. Okay, jumping right in with beer number one. This is Better Half IPA, 6.8% ABV. Really just stupid excited to get jumping into Mikkeller finally. Can art label there. It's got a split kind of skull and a woman there, kind of mouth agape, screaming, blonde haired, big eyed. Interesting little can art there. It's got the classic little Mikkeller cartoon guy hanging out up on the top. That's kind of on all of their branding. But nonetheless, let's get this one cracked. Okay, so I actually had already cracked this to pour it into the glass, but it started frothing all over the place. I had to get up and clean up a mess here. So I'm not going to crack it, but I can get it poured, and I guess I need to be more gentle setting my beers down on my table. Nonetheless, we're going to get this poured in. Oh, it's a very, very dark caramelly colored IPA. I gotta say, I did not anticipate that. Wow, that is just a deep, rich caramel color. And it appears to be quite effervescent. Maybe I didn't slam it on the table. Maybe it's just a really, really highly carbonated beer while that head's settling before I can get... Oh, yeah. That is just going bonkers with carbonation. It is ridiculously active. I can tell you it does have a slightly cloudy appearance to it. It appears, yeah, a little cloudy. Not New England style IPA, but it's not perfectly clear. I'm going to settle this head down a bit. Close enough. But it is a lovely beer, albeit far darker than I anticipated and a bit cloudy. It is a beautifully deep caramel color. I mean, it is the color of actual proper caramel. I'm going to give it a sniff here. Interestingly, as deep as that is, I rather expected to smell like a big abundance of malt and some hops on the front, and I don't, actually. I don't really smell a pronounced aroma at all. It could be because this head is just so thick, it's kind of blocking me from catching the aroma as it comes up out of the glass. When I did get deeper into the rim of the glass there and give a bigger sniff, I could tell you it does smell quite caramelly. It does smell very heavily of caramel malts. It really, really does. It doesn't smell boozy, but it does smell like rich caramel malts. It 100% does. All right, so that head is settling down a bit more now. I'm gonna get this final top off here. I'm gonna be gentle. Got to be gentle when it's that active. All right. Hold this up one more time. And okay, the carbonation doesn't appear to be going quite as bonkers anymore. And yeah, it is a little cloudy. There is some floating sediment in the beer. No problem. Don't have an issue with that. Not all beers are perfectly clear. Some are unfiltered. This may well be one. But yeah, really it's just caramel I can smell. A little bit of a floral aroma comes through as well that mixes with the caramel, but I wouldn't say that it smells hoppy by any stretch of the imagination. Honestly, I think that's about as good as it's going to get for the head settling down. Yeah, it's 3/4 of an inch, give or take, maybe closer to an inch, but let's jump in, see what this is about. Mm. While it may not smell particularly hoppy on the nose, it's definitely in there. Get a nice burst of really earthy bitters up front, and it mixes quite well with what is dominant caramel malt. I mean, they call it that partly because of the color, it's the color of caramel, but partly because of that stage of roasting. It really does impart a caramel-like flavor as well to the beer, and this beer tastes very, very strongly of caramel malt. And it mixes with this nice earthy hop kind of back behind it. Gonna jump in for body and mouthfeel and see exactly how this finish develops. It's got a medium body, which is a little less robust than I anticipated for 6.8. Mouth feels very, very creamy. It was so active, so much fine carbonation. That's why the head formed the way that it did. It's just making a really silky, creamy mouthfeel, much like if you were getting an IPA poured on draft at a bar. It's really quite nice. It's got a little viscosity to it. It's not overtly viscous. It's not syrupy, but it's got some thickness to it, so it's really sticking around the palate and letting these flavors linger. The way that it develops is up front, you get a little malty sweetness, and the first thing immediately behind that, within the first second, you get earthy bitters, and it comes in pretty big punch, and then it kind of backs away and starts to open up into caramel. It's not dissimilar to how the majority of Imperial IPAs develop their flavor. But the hops don't get drowned out like they do in an Imperial IPA. This is still a standard IPA, and the hop does still come through quite prominently. It really does. This beer is really a story of caramel malt paired with a nice earthy hop and a good balance and a good ratio. I think I got that all tapped. Yes, I did. Okay, and that head has finally settled. So let's go in for one final sip here. Malty sweetness, immediate earthy hops, big punch. Nice earthy hops, big punch of bitters. That goes on for several seconds, and the caramel malt really starts to kind of mix in with it. And it's not overwhelming. It doesn't overpower the hop like it would typically in an Imperial, and this is not an Imperial. It's got a good balance to it. The hop is still really the dominant star of this show, albeit a very malt-forward beer. The malts do not drown out the hops at all. This is a properly hoppy IPA. It's got a nice punch of bitters, and it's very rich. This is a rich beer. That thick and that much caramel malt, I mean, I don't know what other malts they may have put in here. It could be pure caramel malt IPA. That could have been what they have done. I don't know. But it's really, really good, and it's very well balanced. The hops are the shining star, and the caramel malts come through beautifully, and you can really taste just this deep caramel. And it's so caramelly in its flavor profile and the aroma that even though this beer is not sweet at all, there is no hint of sweetness other than that first upfront malty sweetness that immediately gets out of the way. Psychologically, it says to your brain caramel, so it imparts the suggestion of sweetness without actually being sweet. It's a neat trick when that happens in beer. I'm always a fan, like just the way that the brain is wired. You associate it with memories of other things, and like it all comes together in the beer. This is a very, very nice beer. It's a very, very nice beer. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we're going to get to the Blanc Ale, Shapes Former, 5.6% ABV. Okay, moving on to beer number 2 of today's Mikkeller review. This is Shapes, parentheses Former, so I'm not sure how they actually want the name pronounced, but neither here nor there. This is a blonde ale, 5% ABV. Gonna go ahead and get this cracked and get this poured. Make sure it doesn't explode like the last one did. And all right, formed a nice frothy head there. Let's see, can art, kind of interesting. I don't even know what to say it looks like. A bunch of sevens and bottles and little body part pieces. It's interesting to say the least. Holding this up, that is a beautiful textbook blonde ale color. Again, another very, very active carbonation-wise beer. This is fully dominated by very tight, fine carbonation bubbles moving up. Probably one of the main reasons it created such a thick, creamy, foamy head. Though it is so active, I can already see part of it is trying to collapse, but it's got so much activity, it just keeps kind of reforming new head there on the beer. Give it a sniff. Wow. This has actually got quite the pronounced aroma. I thought maybe I was crazy, but no, you can smell this from quite a ways away before you even get up over the glass. And it smells very, very malt forward. And it smells very much like a fresh baked loaf of bread. I got to be honest, it does. It smells like freshly baked bread, and it smells fantastic. I mean, just absolutely fantastic. And it's got this sweetness to it too. I mean, this head is really thick and creamy and pillowy, but the aroma is so pungent I can smell it through that thick head. Man, God, that just smells really good. And it's got a slight kind of citrusy aroma to it, which is relatively common for a blonde ale, certainly more common than it smelling like a fresh baked loaf of bread. And I'm not complaining. It smells amazing. It just makes you want to jump right in there. So even though that head, again, is pretty thick, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to jump right in. Ooh, that's nice. That's very nice. Okay, so this beer is very bright. It's very light, as is typical for a blonde ale, and it's got a few different key flavors that come in. First thing you get is that nice malty sweetness. Puts me in mind of a less hop forward Czech or German style Pilsner with that sweetness up front, and then it opens up into a malt bill that doesn't taste dissimilar to a Czech or German Pilsner. Difference being the hops in this are quite a bit more mild than you would get in your average Pilsner. The hop profile that comes in this is mostly kind of earthy hop, but it's got a mix of floral as well that does come through in the flavor. I'm going to jump in another sip here. The body's probably medium to medium light. 5.6%. It's you know, kind of sitting middle in the road for a blonde ale. It's not a super heavy style, but medium light, I'd say. The mouthfeel is pretty creamy. It's not cream stout creamy, and not as creamy as some that have as much effervescent activity, but it is still pretty creamy. It's more creamy than silky. You can still feel the carbonation in there, and it doesn't make a completely lush, silky mouthfeel, but it is creamy nonetheless, which gives the impression of some thickness to it. Even though it's not viscous, it's so creamy that it imparts kind of a sense of thickness to the beer. It doesn't finish particularly dry. It's reasonably wet. Blonde ales can kind of run the gamut. This has a slight dryness, but by and large, it's wet and creamy without being viscous or overtly heavy. I'm going to jump back in and see where these flavors develop around the finish here. First thing in your mouth, burst of malty sweetness, then you start to taste the malts. And it does taste rather like the aroma kind of belied. It's those kind of grainy, cereal-like malt flavors that come through. And then you do get the hops that come through and mix with that. And it's subtle bitters. It's not overtly bitter. And it is a mix of floral and it is a mix of earthy. So that kind of combination pairs very well with the malt sweetness and then that kind of grainy malt flavor that comes through. And it doesn't get a super peaky intensity of flavor. It just kind of all blends together. The various elements become apparent and none of it really rises and peaks and troughs anywhere along the intensity line. So the flavor curve is really more about the flavor ride, not so much intensity. That, for all intents and purposes, is completely static until the finish starts to tail off to the end with its intensity, but it never really gains and then reduces again. It's very flat, and then it just kind of decreases slowly off till the flavor's gone. That said, the finish on this is it's longer than average for a blonde ale. It's not as long as some of the longest I've had for the style, but it does have a good length to it, and it lets you continue to taste really in equal parts that malty sweetness, the kind of cereal and grainy nature of the malt bill, and the hops. They're really in equal parts, so you get equal distribution of sweetness, malt, and hop. It's exceptionally well balanced, and it's very, very clean. This is another one of those beers that I would throw into a great hot summer day beer or hot day beer. It really is that crisp and clean and refreshing, and man, it's a really, really fine example of a blonde ale. I really like this one. I'm going to jump in one more sip, final thoughts here. Oh, it's just so crisp and clean. So crisp and clean. That is just absolutely refreshing. That is a delicious, absolutely delicious blonde ale. It's a style, you know, can kind of run the gamut and gives the brewers a bit of flexibility with what they want to do with it. But, you know, the ones that come out just light and bright and clean and refreshing, those are some of my favorite. But this still has enough hop backbone that it adds just that little extra kick of, ooh, yeah, there's another element here. And it just plays so well. It's so even. This beer is all about balance. It's absolutely all about balance. I love it. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores, and when we come back, we'll get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked, starting with Better Half. This is the IPA, 6.8% ABV on this one. The aroma on this one was nice. It was certainly well above average, but not the top end. But I still gave it an 8 out of 10. For the taste, I really enjoyed it. And though I did think it was exceptionally well balanced, it had such a caramel forward presence that even though it did have a good amount of hops, the caramel flavor was so intense that it did kind of take some of the bitter edge out. So I did dock 1 point on the taste. I gave it a 9. For the body was nice. For 6.8% ABV, I did expect it to be quite a bit more robust than it was, but I gave it a high end of average. I gave it a 6. Mouthfeel, this was silky, creamy, just fantastic. Perfection for mouthfeel. It felt like it came off of a tap at a bar. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Finish on this one. Very nice, very long, and you kept getting all the interplay of the various caramel and toffee and buttery notes, and then the malty sweetness, the slight booziness to it, and the hops, and they just kept interplaying, and it really extended for quite a long time. Again, not quite to the top level, but I only docked 1 point there as well. I gave it a 9. Head and retention, it was fantastic. It was thick, creamy, lush, dense, pillowy, and it retained like not many beers poured at home do. Give it a perfect 10 out of 10. For the appearance, I was torn on this one. This was one of the categories that threw me for a loop. I sincerely didn't expect it to be that dark and occluded. It really looked like an Imperial, though it's not. And, you know, appearance, there's a lot that goes into it. It's the specific roast of the malts that are chosen with which to make the beer, and also the concentration. At 6.8, it had a good amount of fermentables, but in a standard IPA, you wouldn't typically go with an entire caramel malt base. Not to say that you can't, but it was an interesting kind of approach to the beer. I did still think it was a very good beer, and it certainly, you know, kind of looked like an IPA. It was just on the darker end. I didn't want to dock too many points based on their, you know, specific malts that they selected to go with this, but it certainly deviated from the norm. So I gave it the low end of above average. I gave it a 7. Balance on this. This was a very, very well-balanced beer. It was an excellent interplay of malt and hop, and they kept interweaving, and none of them really overshadowed any of the others. While I did want a more pungent hop presence, I really only docked the point on the taste because everything else about this was so well-balanced. I decided to go with my gut, and I give it a 10 for the balance. Feeling in the intangible, I absolutely love this beer. It was very interesting, very unique in the world of IPAs. It reminded me so much of an Imperial, just the way that the malt bill produced itself, but it had a lot more hop character akin to a standard IPA because there weren't as many fermentables in there. I still would have liked a greater hop presence, but I only docked 1 point. I gave it a 9. Finally, as an example of the style, this is a very fine IPA. It's kind of a unique IPA in the realm of IPAs because there's not many that are brewed with what I presume is just a base boatload of caramel malts. I don't know if they used any Pilsner malts or any other type of malt in there, a lighter roast of some random 2-row barley, but honestly, it was very caramel forward. And the caramel was so pungent that it did drown out some of the bitter. It wasn't overt, but it wasn't as hop forward as it could have been and that I personally would have liked. But again, I only docked 1 point here as well. I give it a 9. That brings the total score on Better Half to an 87 out of 100. So again, a very, very high score. This is a well above average beer. I do recommend it. Moving on to number 2, this is Shapes, parentheses former. This is their blonde ale at 5.6% ABV. The aroma on this was really very pungent for a blonde ale. I could smell it from quite a ways away, and it smelled amazing. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Taste on this was just as light and crisp and refreshing as you would expect any blonde ale, but it had a lot more presence. It had a lot more interesting flavors in it, and certainly the hops came through a bit more heavily than your average blonde ale. I gave it a perfect 10 out of 10. For the body on this one, the body on this was really medium light, which is kind of standard for the range, but 5.6 is a little higher ABV than average for a blonde ale, so I kind of split the difference. I gave it the low end of above average. I gave it a 7. Mouthfeel was very, very nice. It was very, very creamy, though not quite to the silky level you get with many top-tier blonde ales. It had a slight dryness to it, which is not outside of the norm for the beer style, but since it was so wet and it had such a creamy nature, I expected it to just generate a bit more viscosity than it did. I only docked 1 point. I gave it a 9. Finish on this beer was nice. It really lets you taste all the interplay of all the various facets of the beer, from the malty sweetness to the very bright kind of floral quality of the hops, and also the background earthy hops that went into it, and that nice kind of cereal grainy malty character. It just needed a little extra length for me to kick it to top tier. I give it a low end of above average. I gave it a 7. Head and retention, just as with the Better Half, it looked like it could have come off to a tap, and it had staying power, unlike many you can pour at home. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Appearance-wise, this was a textbook blonde ale that was picture perfect. It gets a 10 out of 10. Balance. Exceptionally well-balanced beer. Just as with the better half, it had a lot going for it. You get the full balance of the malty sweetness, the grain and cereal quality to the grain bill that they used, and the hops, and none of them really overshadowed any other. It was equal parts pretty much through the entire length of each sip. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Filling in intangible, I absolutely love this. Blonde ales are not one of my de facto go-to styles when I'm buying beer just for my own pleasure, but they're very good, and particularly during the hot months. It's only early August here in Tampa, though this video will be going live probably early January or very late December of 2019 because I record well in advance to stay ahead. But right now, this is a great beer choice for me. It is super hot in Tampa in August, and this is a very refreshing beer. I loved it. Give it a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, there are many, many, many blonde ales out there from which to choose, but this was one of the more special ones, indeed, that I've had. It had hoppiness without being overtly hoppy and ruining the style. It had a nice malty sweetness without being too sweet, and it had a full range of various flavors and elements to the malt bill, and it came together in perfect harmony. You had that, it really was a whole package for me. I do think, even though I docked some points in various categories, overall as an example of the style, this is a phenomenal one. I did give it a perfect 10 out of 10. That brings the total score on Shapes Former to a 93 out of 100. So all totaled only a 6-point spread, both cleanly well above average beers, and great examples of why Mikkeller is so well regarded on a global scale in the craft beer world and loved by craft beer enthusiasts all around. Ladies and gentlemen, that's today's review. As always, I sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I know you always hear it, but it really does help the channel, and it will help you not lose our content. If you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just click the little notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Till next time, folks, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.